This is the Bottom Line Sports Show with Gerald Brown and Rick Mahorn.
Imagine you trade a Chet Holmgren for a Giannis Antetokounmpo.
These guys are athletic as you know what, and you go like, oh my gosh, where's the fundamentals? Where's the pass first mentality? That's not in the league anymore.
And now here's your host, Gerald Brown and Rick Mahorn.
What's up, everybody? Gerald Brown, upcoming. Again, you know Rick is not here right now because the Pistons and Magic are doing battle. But nevertheless, I'm here and going to be joined momentarily by Anthony Morrow. Unbelievable NBA action to get into. And as always, you know, we start the show off by saying, hey, you know, make sure you go out and subscribe to the channel, as well as, you know what, like the Instagram page, G Brown Sports, as we continue to bring some great quality content to the sports waves. And, you know, we do it for you guys. So really appreciate that moving forward. But subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get up over 1,000 and then take it from there. And if you have done so already, we say thank you. Really appreciate it. So right now, Pistons and Magic about to tip off. And, you know, what's interesting about this game, and I talked about it yesterday, Pistons are in a very difficult situation. You know, yeah, being down, you know, 2-1, right? When the Knicks were down 2-1, it was a sense of panic. It was a sense of urgency. And you kind of understand that the playoffs are about ebb and flows, right? It's ebb and flows. It's all about adjustments. You know, I said yesterday, who makes adjustments? And what I'm witnessing and starting to realize in this specific space right now is the is the fact is that I don't know the adjustments were properly made. Clearly, you can see that when it comes to the Detroit Pistons, right? You know, them being down 3-1 is not something that if you're a Pistons fan, you could just write off and say, you know what, they'll be fine. I don't think you can do that. This is very serious. And the biggest thing that I've taken away from this, they have made I'm talking about the Orlando Magic, have made the Pistons very uncomfortable when you look at them. And shout out to everybody that's watching and stuff. Really appreciate you. Upcoming, Anthony Morrow is going to be joining me, A-Mo, as well as we're going to get into some conversation about last night's Knicks and Hawks with Locked On Hawks postcast announcer and host DeShaun Tate is going to be joining me. As I said before, sign up with the YouTube page. Really appreciate the support, as well as follow me on G Brown Sports, because we're just going to continue to bring you amazing content, nothing but the best for the best. So as I mentioned, when it comes to the Pistons and the Orlando Magic, it's clearly evident the Pistons, you know, they're in a fight. And it's going to require them to do something they haven't been able to do in this series thus far, is counter whatever the Orlando Magic are doing. And I think the biggest thing is, I don't know if they can counter the physicality that the Orlando Magic are demonstrating. Now, the big story for the Orlando Magic is Franz Wagner, part of that stud front court that they have with him, as well as Paolo Banchero, and then also adding into the mix Wendell Carter. I don't know if they are in a position to basically be able to counter that physicality. That is something that has been very eye-opening, to say the least, about them. And yet, when you look at this moving forward, not having Paolo Banchero kind of opens up the door. And look, the Pistons are going to have to answer the bell for that. they're going to have to be able to try to see if they can make the adjustment and make the Orlando Magic, fill the loss and the void of, not having Franz Wagner. But I say this, if you needed an example of just basically, if the Magic are afraid or intimidated, and I know those are strong words, but I'll say hesitant. Just go back and look at that Jamal Cain dunk of the Orlando Magic over, Jalen Duren. And look, I'm be honest with you. If you are a big man in the NBA, you're going to get dunked on, right? That is going to happen. It happens, and those things can occur. But what I'll say is about this is the fact is that in watching the different replays of it, right? Like I saw a shout out to people on Instagram and all over places. I was watching some of those highlights, and what I witnessed was a person that really wasn't afraid of Jalen Duren there. Like Jalen Duren was there, and he didn't have no hesitation. This is a guy that's a two-way player. He had no hesitation and basically went up. No hesitation, no thoughts, no consequence, nothing. I'm going up, and dunked on him. And the way he handled himself afterwards really told me a lot. Barry Sanders, another, NFL Detroit Lion great, always said his dad told him, act like you've been there before. Now look, this is a guy that's on a two-way contract. And you know what? This is the playoffs. This is my name. This is my coming out party. Make my name. Right? He could have had one of those moments. Showed him up, get a tee, all that stuff, and now the momentum shifts. But that wasn't the case. He screamed, looked at him, nothing that would ever warrant the referee to say, give him a tech. Didn't show him up because all the proof was in the pudding, if you will. And this is going to be something that I'm going to be very, very curious to see how it plays out. Don't forget, we're on tomorrow. Rick Mahorn will be back tomorrow. And, we'll be on at 7 p.m. as well as Mr. Jeff Rulin, former NBA player, will be on tomorrow. So we're going Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week. And, like I said before, really, really appreciate everybody tuning in as, we'll wait for Anthony Morrow to join me momentarily. But I just think that clearly this is going to be a space where when I look at the Detroit Pistons, we're going to learn a lot about them this evening. Speaking about learning about them, hey, look, Paolo Banchero, there was talks about maybe Paolo would be, a piece if it came down to trying to acquire Giannis Antetokounmpo. And there was so much talk about perhaps that would have been a deal that the Magic would have invested in. Again, we didn't hear anything official, but obviously you couldn't do that if you're the Magic to make anything publicly, because that would kind of, in a sense, show the lack of faith thereof of Paolo. But nevertheless, I'm looking at this Magic team, and they're clicking on all cylinders at the right time, right? They're clicking, right? I mean, they were a little shaky in the playing game. They took care of business and really threw around the Charlotte Hornets. And then they took that momentum where I said before, going into this series, game one, I thought the Pistons were rusty, right? I thought they were rusty, and they answered every counter punch the Pistons threw, and Orlando Magic made big shots. But now the question is, with Wagner out for game 5, what type of adjustments it will become for the Orlando Magic. And I think also, too, these playoffs have really showed us a lot of things that perhaps we don't get a chance to see on a consistent basis, trying to watch 82 games of an individual team. But one thing I've learned about this series in these playoffs, number one, Dyson Daniels, excellent defender, but also to Jalen Suggs. And, we always talk about guys when they come in from college, like everybody's mindset to get to the NBA or to get to college. Like I think about the AAU circuit, the travel basketball circuit. It's all about scoring, 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 right? That gets the attention, or at least we think that gets the attention of a college coach or an individual, plain and simple. You got to score, you got to score. Then the mindset of the belief is you got to score to get to the NBA. Well, you look at a guy like Jalen Suggs, who, when he was at Gonzaga, he was a scoring option, a guy that was aggressive, played with a lot of energy. Again, an offensive threat. When I look at Jalen Suggs now and the impact he has on this team, not this year only, but the previous year, and it's amazing because it's energy, effort, and hustle, right? Like diving on the floor. He is a glue guy for the Orlando Magic. And what I mean by a glue guy, no, he's not a guy that could just score and or just play defense and he disappears on the offensive side. No, he's a comfortable scorer, but he's a guy that I'm trying to think of the words. People will say a two-way player and all that stuff. No, this is a guy that, again, plays both ends of the court, and he's an effective player. And I remember I was talking to an NBA executive, and we were talking about how the struggles of the Orlando Magic transpired last year, right? A franchise that was, again, a lot of expectation. I thought they peaked a little ahead of time, and really obviously under the leadership of head coach Jabal Mosley. And then they kind of regressed last season. Well, if you go back, I was talking to this NBA official, and the NBA official said, you know what? They lost Jalen Suggs. That was a guy that was the heart and soul of that team. And when Suggs, who had the injury, and then they shut him down for the remainder of the season, just really couldn't replace that. And ever since then, I've been watching Jalen Suggs to see exactly how he has transformed his game from what he was in college to the NBA, and now how he plays along with these other great players on his team. So I think that is very, very significant and very huge. Speaking about very huge, the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Toronto Raptors. And I don't know if I should give the credit to the Toronto Raptors totally, or do you give the credit to or discredit the Cleveland Cavaliers for not taking care of business to allow this series to be extended. Now, I don't want to shame the Toronto Raptors because, again, to win games in the NBA is a very, very challenging process. It's not easy at all. If that was the case, everybody would win 50-plus games, and, again, it would just be a dogfight. But when I look at the Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm still expecting them to assert themselves, right? Like they got out the gate very, very well, right? And they got out the gate very, very well in that first game of that series. I thought that they would take off, took the first two games. I said, you know what? They were on their way. They're going to make light work of this series and really see how they're locked in. And even when they lost the first game 3, I said, you know what? I'm not worried about that because obviously you go on the road, things might happen, whatever. But for them to be in a space where they're tied at 2-2 in this series, it just harkens back to the fact is when they've been in spaces where they've won 60-plus games, when they've been in spaces where, again, we thought that they were the odds-on favorite to be a major, major championship contender, they've fallen short. And I don't know if that franchise psychologically has recovered from that series loss to the New York Knicks a couple years back, where they were favored in that series. And yet the Knicks came in there, Mitchell Robinson and all those guys, very physical, dominant, and they really took it to the Cleveland Cavaliers and kind of, if you will, exposed the fact is, although they had a tall front line, they were very, very, if you will, soft around that basket. So I'm just very surprised. And that is sort of a MO, if you will, of the Cleveland Cavaliers that I honestly believe that they have struggled mightily to overcome. And now you have James Harden there, Donovan Mitchell. You know, I think this comes down to, if you will, a must-win for the Cavaliers. And, it's game 5. It's not the end of the series if they lose it. But I think the pressure mounts. And I think not only the pressure mounts, but I think it also becomes an issue where Cavs fans will say, here we go again, right? Like, okay, here we go again. And not only Cavs fans, but the players that have been there, here we go again. That we're having a series extended. And once a series is consistently extended, now you put the things into a place where potentially you could have an upset in the first round. And they have been there and they've done that. So I'm very curious to see how well they perform coming out the gate here for this upcoming game there. And talking about the coming out the gate, as we wait for Anthony Morrow to join me and stuff, as well as Locked on Hawks postcast host DeShaun Tate. Knicks, unbelievable performance last night, right? The New York Knicks came out, and I clearly would just say that they took care of business. Looked effective, and now they have made the Atlanta Hawks try to make a counter move as this series now is in a space where the Knicks can close them out in Atlanta. And speaking about the Atlanta Hawks, let's bring on gentleman. He's done an outstanding job, man, and not a good brother, but a great brother, and really, really appreciate him so many times and stuff. He's always reached out and really, really supported the Bottom Line Sports Show on so many different platforms, and really, really, truly an honor and a privilege to have him on right now, joining me to talk about, from an Atlanta Hawks standpoint and this series, exactly the direction this is going to go from Locked on Hawks postcast host, Mr. DeShaun Tate. DeShaun, what's going on, man? Bring you up right here, here on the Bottom Line Sports Show. DeShaun, what's going on? How you doing, man?
Man, I'm blessed, man. Thank you so much for having me and just enjoying the space with me, and grateful to be able to, join you on the show, and man, just ecstatic of just the NBA playoffs in general. Obviously, with the Atlanta Hawks, Game 6 coming up with the New York Knicks, and when you're on the brink of elimination, that changes things in terms of desperation sometimes, and so we'll have to wait and see exactly what comes of that, because there's some boxes to check. There's some I's that need dotted. There's some T's that needs crossed. There's some X's that needs crossed. There's some lowercase J's that need dotted. So the Atlanta Hawks definitely have their work, their work cut out for them.
Let me ask you this. This series has been the epitome of what you would expect and understand about the playoffs. It's all about ebb and flows, right? Mm-hmm. In the perfect world, everybody would look to do what the Oklahoma City Thunder have done, which is, dispose of their first round opponent, and it was never in doubt. When you look at this series, I looked at game 1, and even when the Knicks won, I'd said that, the Atlanta Hawks, they have confidence, right? It's like, okay, we can come in here, we're going to be able to get one. We close. So even in the midst of a defeat, there was a moral victory. They come out, they get game 2, stun the Knicks, come back, then they carry that over to game 3. And yet it's all about adjustments. And so when it came out in game 4, the Knicks countered their adjustment. And it just seems apparent that in game 5, for some way, it seems like the energy has shifted back to the Knicks, and they seem like they're asserting themselves to pretty much try to dominate the Hawks and stuff. What have been your observations thus far in this series with so much of the back and forth and how things now play out for the Atlanta Hawks?
Well, it's funny the way that it worked out, so similar to, you know, the way that the series is actually going on now, right? With the Magic and the Pistons, is that the Magic has been beating the Pistons the way that the Pistons have beat people all year long. Particularly in last night's game being game 5 in New York. Um, the Knicks have kind of taken a page out of the book of the Atlanta Hawks in terms of getting beat, you know, beating the Hawks down the floor, getting out in the transition, some of those quick outlet passes, things that the Atlanta Hawks, how that they have obviously predicated their success off of, especially after the All-Star break. But I think it's more so of a matter of, I think a big key component or ingredient for the success of the New York Knicks has been Karl Anthony Towns just being assertive, aggressive, early and often, in terms of in the first half specifically, right? Where you allow him to stand out there on the perimeter, that's where you can afford to maybe have someone with some quick, you know, feet, lateral movement defensively, like a Jonathan Kuminga, to maybe definitely not stop a Karl Anthony Towns, but certainly be able to maybe contain him a little bit more, because as long as you have someone present and not late closing out, things like that, you want to maybe not live with Karl Anthony Towns taking that jump shot, but the efficiency is a lot lower percentage of a shot than it is to where he gets into some of those downhill actions and things of that nature, which they've done a good job of, the New York Knicks as of late. I'm not sure what, you know, head coach Quinn Snyder is going to cook up for this next game, game 6, because the adjustment that was made for game 5, where you put Dyson Daniels, was, you know, inarguably probably the best defender on that roster. Let's be clear, that is the best perimeter defender on that roster. Putting him on someone like Karl Anthony Towns, it was just pretty much feed Towns, hungry hippo, go to the cup and get some very easy baskets from that standpoint. And so, I mean, even, you know, guys such as, you know, Deuce for New York in games 1 and 2 didn't play all that well. Might have averaged about 3 points. We averaged somewhere close north of 12 or 13 points in the other games collectively. So I think it's just a matter of, it's not, you know, checkers, it's chess. CJ McCollum needs some assistance. Nickeil Alexander-Walker probably averaging 7 points below his average as the most improved player. And it's just about getting the stops. And New York just has the better talent, the better roster. They're flexing their muscles, they're proving it, and they're being the aggressor. I do think it'll be a lot tighter of a game for game 6 going into Atlanta. Potentially a game that I think Atlanta could win. I anticipated and expected that they would. It would go 7 with the Knicks coming out. But after last night, I think you'd be really hard pressed to find anybody that wouldn't say that the Knicks is going to finish this thing off in 6 games.
Really? Yeah. You know what's kind of interesting is that all of a sudden now it seems apparent that the 3-point shot, right, and consistency with the 3-point shot was so effective in the 2 wins for the, even, you know, in the 2 wins, even in that game 1 loss for the Hawks. It just seems like it has disappeared. And, you know, it seemed apparent that from that game, I want to say game 4, right? When that game 4 in Atlanta, and, you know, how the Knicks were able to assert themselves and then come back and really step it up in game 5, where they were just very active. But how surprised are you that the shooting and the 3-point shooting consistency hasn't been there for the Hawks in these 2 games? And what do you think that contributed to, outside of perhaps the Knicks guarding the perimeter very well?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's more so of a matter, and I am a little bit surprised, more so based on the fact that because Atlanta has so many guys that can hit the shot from the perimeter, with the exception of Dyson Daniels, where when he hit one last night, I was a little bit concerned. I'm like, I don't know if this is concerning because they have very limited scoring options, that they're allowing him to sit back there and shoot some of those jump shots and he can actually make one, or if that's actually an encouraging thing. I'm not sure, but I think that's another piece, is in the front court where the Hawks are so thin. It reminds me, you know, Oyeko Okongwu kind of reminds me of things that my mom used to tell me growing up when I used to ask for this and that, and can we go here and can we go there? I need this, I need that. And she used to say, Sean, I'm only one person. And that's exactly who Onyeka Okongwu is. He's only one person. He's an undersized big. And I think that, obviously you got to give him a lot of credit for the steps that he have taken. Why is the Atlanta Hawks have, improved the way that they have this year, because he stepped up his game. We talk a lot about Nickeil Alexander-Walker stepping up his, Jalen Johnson stepping up his, and maybe a couple of the others. Not as much Onyeka Okongwu, because after Jock Landale goes down, now is Onyeka Okongwu this high flying above the rim, uber athletic big, or an ideal, prototypical, naturally born and bred center for this league? No. But they're doing the best that they can with him. And obviously they got some things to address in that position in terms of the off season or what have you. But Jock Landale goes down. That's your backup big, who was playing relatively well for them. You bring in Tony Bradley, who hadn't been checked into the game nearly as much, if any at all. Last night, he checks in with 7 minutes into the game, which was a little bit slightly surprising. Mohamed Gay, who's really good defensively and kind of like that, maybe not heart and soul, but he is kind of like that aggressor, if you will, type of player, but not really seeing a lot of time from him from that standpoint. And then, you don't, not that this guy is anything to sneeze at or write home to mom about in the front court by any means, but for all intents and purposes, Zachary Reese-Shea, who moved on to the bench, right, started getting a little bit of some good production from him, similarly to before they traded DeAndre Hunter. Gave some good contribution and some production from that standpoint, but he also hasn't seen the floor very much. So I think that they're getting exposed from the Knicks defensively. But Onyeka Okongwu, who has done a great job improving that jump shot, trailing back as the last guy to hit some of those threes from the top of the key on the perimeter. The shot hasn't been falling, and that's even when he's getting the opportunity to take those shots. The Knicks doing such a good job at closing out.
Yeah, DeShaun, obviously you don't want to write off Game 6 and just say, hey, based upon, the way things have gone, because, clearly it's all about moves, what adjustments, the teams will make. But you touched on somebody that I thought was very interesting. And, that draft, right, with Alex Saw and Zachary Reese-Shea, I kind of forgot that he was still a part of this team. Are you surprised? And I mean, clearly, look, you see them on a consistent basis. Is there a sense of surprise in his development that he is not able to be effective or participate in this series? I mean, this is a guy that was your number one pick, right? I mean, it's one of your top picks. I think he was number 2. And, where he's at now, you would think in his progression, is this a setback if, with him not being a contributor in this series thus far?
I think so, more so from the fact that, number one, while he doesn't have a ton of experience, I do understand that they probably brought him in and eased him in a little bit more than you typically would a number one pick, and change, the way that you develop him. He's not going to be a, typical number one pick or have the expectations of a typical number one pick in most cases or in most classes. And that's understood, especially, I mean, in that particular draft isn't either, if I'm just being quite honest. And so, from what they needed him to be from a, defensive standpoint, he hasn't necessarily been that. From a, floor running standpoint, I think he's been really good. One of the better guys, I think, moves without the ball on this team. Loses his defenders on backdoors and things of that nature. But I just think that with the wingspan and the potential, I don't think that he's ready for this, for this type, to see this type of action. Now, should he be able to see a little bit more than he has? I think so, especially because Jonathan Kuminga is relatively new to everything that's going on in Atlanta as well. I think that is another key piece or key component for this team, perhaps maybe even an X factor, because they're running such a 3-guard offense right now where they're already outmatched because of size between CJ McCollum, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Dyson Daniels. You're not going to get, the rebounds, and luckily they've been able to get some more of those coming off of, hard off the rim, or, some of those guys have been, guards have been quicker to get to some of those rebounds that come off hard. But I think it's just more so a matter of, as far as Zachary Reese-Shea, is him just not really being prepared and ready for this kind of moment. Has he lived up to the expectations? Absolutely not. There's not many guys in this class that have, but I do think he deserves a little bit more minutes. I mean, he played a few games, obviously, against the New York Knicks, but particularly I know that there was once or twice last year where they played against the Knicks. He had 33 points and he looked pretty good, and he can kind of, he can be able to take some of that pressure off at least a little bit with how smart and high IQ that the Atlanta Hawks typically play with the exception of some of the turnovers that they have. But again, you have to credit much of that to the New York Knicks defense. It's a shame that we don't see Zachary Risachet out there a little bit more, but the lights and the stage might be just a little bit too big and bright.
Yeah. When you look at this series, and obviously, look, let's just say hypothetically, if the Knicks closed them out and it doesn't go 7, and the Knicks closed them out, where are the moral victories for the Atlanta Hawks? Because again, for them to extend the Knicks and get this series to right now 6 games and possibly 7, it has to be a moral victory, especially with a franchise that made the change and trading their franchise player at the deadline and bringing in these pieces, and for them to end up in this space and make it a very competitive series thus far. Where are the moral victories for the Atlanta Hawks?
I think that it is, having someone like a Nickeil Alexander-Walker who's able to play both sides of the ball, and obviously he's not playing very well right now, but that won't be a consistent thing, just to continuing to make the right kind of moves, within the front office to put together, pieces of the way that Quinn Snyder likes to coach, continue to shoot the 3 ball at a high clip, at a high elite level. Just something you haven't been seeing nearly as much, in this series, obviously, but they're on the upward trajectory. Again, I think you'd be very hard pressed to find anyone who would disagree to say that the Atlanta Hawks are moving in the right direction after the trade for Trae Young, continuing to keep in the main thing. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I mean, they're playing up against a team that is expected to go to either the NBA Finals or certainly contend to represent the East. I'm not sure that I can name, 2 other teams in front of the New York Knicks that has the kind of expectations, that has the type of playoff experience that this Atlanta Hawks team doesn't have. You have a lot of guys up and down this Atlanta Hawks roster who's playing either in the Atlanta Hawks, starting 5 for the first time, or putting on an Atlanta Hawks uniform for the very first time this season. And so I think that just knowing that you're going in the right direction, knowing that you are okay with winning and losing games the way that you play, one of the top in the league in terms of assists, space in the floor, in terms of pace, getting up and down the floor, rebounding the basketball fairly well, got to be able to make free throws. I call it the free space on the bingo card, and they're not hitting those. And those are some of the things that they have to do, obviously, in making the 3-2 and protecting the basketball. Part of what I'm learning as of early in my days of parenting is taking care of the baby. They're not taking care of the baby very well. But they're playing better defensive. They play better collectively as a unit. So I think that there was a lot of instances when Trae Young was on this team that while he does put butts in seats and while he's electrifying and entertaining and all of these different things, and nobody loves Trae Young more than DeShaun Tate, trust and believe. But I think that there was just so much truth to when you saw Trae Young either not in the game or when he was injured, and you had DeJounte Murray. The team rallied around the leadership of DeJounte Murray, playing both sides of the ball and all those other things. And they looked to just like they were just playing better collectively as a cohesive unit. Now you move on from him, you still have Trae Young, but Trae Young goes down, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, they now look like a new team, similar to the way that they did when they had DeJounte Murray. So moving on from that permanently, I think that you are clearly seeing a more a team with some chemistry, a team that now has some leadership in a different way than Trae was bringing it, and CJ McCollum. And I think that those are, particularly 2 things that I've always thought since I've been here in Atlanta almost 21 years, that they just didn't really have that extension from on the coach on the floor, a little bit of an enforcer from Mohamed Gay, a little bit on the defensive side, and CJ's leadership. I think that you're certainly going in the right direction. Just New York is just a different beast, and because you're one game removed, because of a difference in one game, you're not playing the Cleveland Cavaliers, you're playing the New York Knicks, and they have their eyes set on something much bigger than just the first round.
Yeah, DeShaun, pretty much before I let you get on out of here, what do you think this team, and obviously without naming players, but what areas do you think that obviously what positions you would say that you would hope the Hawks address this offseason via free agency, maybe trade, or the draft? Obviously, you talked about the impact of Nickeil Alexander-Walker as well as CJ McCollum. Obviously CJ is there. He's pretty much a temporary stopgap. And then you obviously talked about Jock Landale not being available and stuff. So they're kind of limited. Where do you see the areas and positions that you would think and hope that the Atlanta Hawks address this offseason via the draft, free agency, or possibly trade?
Probably the most pivotal and critical positions in the game in order to, in order to win basketball games like the ones that they're going to be playing, which is the center position first and foremost. So Onyeka Okongwu is not this traditional center. And I'm not saying move him out of that starting spot. Maybe he's your starting four and Jalen Johnson's probably your point wing, if you will. But certainly needs someone with some size. This is not necessarily the draft outside of Michigan's Adai Mara and maybe Henry Visar from North Carolina or what have you, to maybe look in that direction, but certainly get someone that's serviceable, that can play such a position and be able to defend the rim, provide you with a little bit of rim protection. So that's one of them. And then the point guard position, I think too. I mean, you have guys that are, fairly heavy at the guard spot, but none of them are this natural born and bred prototypical point guard, if you will. They do it by committee and kind of by default. CJ McCollum, can he play it? Yes, but is that like your long-term? I think the deal are relatively close. They're going to make some decisions on whether they're bringing him back too, but is he this natural point guard that you really want to be your scorer and setting up the offense and doing all these other things? Probably not. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, again, another one of those names by default, but he's not really a point guard. Dyson Daniels is another one of those names where I trust him defending, but I don't always trust him dribbling, let alone shooting the basketball. And you're bringing Gabe Vincent off the bench, which is cool, and that's cute, but that's probably just about it. Good as a backup, if you will. But I do think that if they are going to make the decision, which I don't think is the worst in the world, to keep one of those starting guards as your primary point guard, either being CJ or Nickeil, maybe, then you certainly have to do a little bit better than Gabe Vincent. While I do love Gabe in terms of his experience, playoff experience coming over from Miami and maybe LA or whatnot, you got to bring a little bit more heat than that. And so you definitely need some help at the point guard position and at the center position, because right now, I will be honest, they're doing the best with the cards that they have been dealt. But obviously that's going to kind of run out when you run into forces like the one that they're running into right now. So you gotta get off the stay running on the rat wheel. You got to make some changes. You got to take some risk, of course. They prove and shown that they were able to do that with moving on from Trae Young. But they've just always been a team that's just right here. When other teams have been above that and right here and have gone down this far, have come back around to being this good, drop back down this far and come back, the Atlanta Hawks have just always tend to stay right here, okay with just being mediocre, decent, not taking the risk versus the reward, all those different types of things. They have to make some changes, but right now, for the first time in a really long time, if I'm really being honest, I really think that this team is on the upward trajectory of something special. I don't know that I'm willing to go that far, but to improve off of where they currently are right now, which was a significant jump, I think that they're on the right track.
Yeah, you talked about obviously both Gabe Vincent and CJ McCollum, great veterans, and it's great, tremendous analysis in regards to that position, because you're right. They don't have a playmaker, a guy that's going to set other guys up. And if they do, it's done by committee, but it's almost in a sense that's not their area of expertise. They have a lot of scoring guards. But you mentioned about Gabe Vincent and CJ McCollum. These are guys on the end of their deals. And obviously you have Alexander Walker, who's there. It's going to be there for some time. Is it safe to say that this is Jalen Johnson's team going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, with all that he's been able to, put himself in position to do and be for this team. And listen, it's a learning curve for him too. I don't know if I go as far as saying he's got the keys to the city and all that, but certainly, for all intents and purposes, it is his team. But I think at some point you have to put him in position to where he's playing exactly that, his natural position. He's being asked to do so much. He was the number one defensive rebounding guy in the league this year, and so many triple doubles. I think the second most in the NBA this year, behind Nikola Jokic, and being that point forward between his assists and his rebounds, and so much is being asked of him even. And this is a new situation for him. I mean, he hasn't been in the league that long. He hasn't been called up from the G League all that long ago, and he also has to be a guy that stays healthy, which this is the first time that I think he's done that in his career, certainly within the last 3 or 4 years. And so while we all love his improvement and the strides that he has taken and the steps that he has taken to getting better, and so has this team, I think that, life is a little bit different when you don't have number 11 anymore, and the bullseye and the target is a little bit more so on your back. But just with time, comes with knowing how to, prepare and deal with such pressure.
Yeah, they won 46 games this year. Look, that's 46 games. They got 2 wins thus far in the playoffs. I think that, again, it's a heck of an accomplishment for this team. Before I let you get on out of here, how important will it be, in your opinion? And do you expect the Atlanta Hawks fans to show up tomorrow and not have the, State Farm Arena just pretty much immersed with all those
Madison Square Garden South, pretty much?
Yeah. It's the Madison Square Garden of the South. How important is it going to be? And realistically, based upon your time and the history of the Atlanta Hawks, are you expecting that the fans, Hawks fans, will come out in droves? Or is it kind of in a situation where it's like, I got something else better to do?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think that there's some differences there where you have, and about this, being a New York guy and all that, New York, we call it hit different. I don't know if the cool kids are still using that term, but, when it comes to New York, it hits different. They're diehard, passionate fans about their team. You can call it what you want, obnoxious and whatever else you want, but they ride for their team. And they're loud about it. You can call it boisterous or whatever cute term that you want to use, but they are that. And so you got to drown out those fans. You do that by making sure you're winning, playing winning basketball, and making the right plays and winning plays and things of that nature. So some of that does have to deal with, the team itself. But outside of that, you get so many, I've been hearing for so many years. I've been here 21, 22 years already. And people, I've heard fair weather fans and this and that. The reality is that there's so many more fans that are Hawks supporters and pull for the Atlanta Hawks because they come from different places than there is these super die-hard Atlanta Hawks fans. So I don't think it's just a matter of showing up, because I think they're going to do that. But the cheering and the roaring, it just has to be louder than the Knicks, because listen, when one of those Knicks players go to the free throw line and you're hearing MVP and let's go Knicks and all the things that you and me both hear, you have to drown that out and you have to just be louder. And the reality is a lot of times in the South, it's just not, it's not, the teams are not supported the same. I'm not saying more or less, it's just different. And so come out, wear your red, and be loud, cheering on the Atlanta Hawks, and making them feel like that it's your team, not that just you're pulling for them or rooting for them. But I think that will be critical in tomorrow's game. But at the end of the day, it's the team that has to give the fans a reason, and I think that's where it starts and ends.
I have to go back to, I think when Trey was there, first got there a couple of years, and they had that improbable run, and Trey doesn't get hurt, they might end up in the Eastern Conference Finals, and the run that they were on. And I went as far as to say that I thought that they were headed to being perhaps the Golden State Warriors of the East, where the way they were built, the way they played. And yet, even in the midst of that run, the Hawks fans, and I'm not going to say all the Hawks fans, but the city of Atlanta, I felt didn't embrace them, right? Because again, let's be honest, that's football country, right?
No question.
You got UGA football, you got the Atlanta Falcons, and then it's somewhere in between there. It's the Hawks and the Braves, and it's like.
It's probably the Braves before it is the Hawks. I mean, it's probably Atlanta United before it is the Hawks. There's probably a couple others that I could probably name between some golfing and some other things. And I might be a little bit facetious when I say that, but I mean, no, listen, you're absolutely correct, Gerald.
But this goes back, and I don't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, it goes back to even with Dominique and those guys, and those great teams we had on the show last week, Kevin Willis and stuff. Those teams, and granted they couldn't get over the hump, but it just seems like what it never could be able to replace the Hawks. I mean, excuse me, the Falcons, UGA football. And granted, look, UGA at that time, the football team, Georgia Bulldogs. That's the SEC. They weren't winning national titles.
For sure.
But it's still the Atlanta Falcons and stuff. But it just always felt like the loyalty and the allegiance for the city of Atlanta.
Yeah.
And always resided with those other franchises. And what I was going to say also, too, is that, you talk about the Atlanta Braves, they play out damn near Marietta, right? So they are not really entrenched in the heart of the city of Atlanta. And I'm just baffled by that. And, like you said, but why? Why is this disconnect for a franchise that's been there for so long?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think some of it could be so many different things. I mean, and again, this is totally something different, I'm sure, because Georgia Tech likes to play school more than they do athletics sometimes. But how are you not able to get 18-year-old kids right in the heart and center of Atlanta when, and I know we could talk about academics and all that other type of stuff, whatever, what have you, but, but the reality is what it is. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why you don't have Damon Stoudemire there anymore, which is a whole different conversation. But, I will say that it's not embraced the way that it should be, could be. And, I think some of it is on the ownership of bringing, when you have the chance to bring some guys in here, you got to bring those guys up in here. You have to give the people a reason too. And they haven't necessarily done that. I mean, there were some instances we could talk about, them, making some of the trades that they've done on draft night to even getting the right guy on a draft, let alone anything else, or, maybe not offering Al Horford a cup of coffee before he left and went to Boston where he probably deserved it. Paul Millsap being another one. And those are teams that went on to do some things that, had never, been done in Atlanta before. And so it's really about embracing. It's not football. It's never going to be football. But there are towns that I think that they should do their homework on sometimes and take a page out of their book. There's some Bostons and some other ones, some LAs and whatever else, what have you, that knows how to support both. But I don't know if it's about being a melting pot with so many different people coming from so many different places. A lot of times it just feels like it's a social gathering at State Farm. And I'm just being honest. This is just the transparency of what it is.
Yeah, and you know what? Forgive me. I mean, I was just thinking about that as we were talking, and I just came across the fact is that why? Because look, why? Miami is kind of in the same situation. A lot of transient people live there.
A lot of nightlife.
Yeah, the nightlife and stuff, and yet they're still supported there in the Miami. Now, I will say, obviously, it did help. Having LeBron there, that kind of change the trajectory of that franchise and really help support them, and then them winning NBA championships. And then, being honest, look, they're still living off of that, but it was something that helped kickstart that franchise. And to this day, it just seems like it looks like Miami is more supported by their community.
Correct.
Atlanta Hawks, and I mean, that's no disrespect.
Sure.
They've
had a different level of success. Miami has too, even after LeBron has left. But they've also taken some chances. They've also taken some risks to go and get some players that also fit something that Atlanta doesn't necessarily have, which is a combination of identity and culture. And that's something that Miami kind of has established that Atlanta doesn't necessarily have. And I think that plays a part. It's a, now we start getting into conversations about, why guys don't want to come to Atlanta. I think a lot of that has more to do with front office and the way that they've treated players more so than what you hear other people say, which I don't know if it's a running joke or running truth about, players' wives and side pieces and all sorts of other stuff that gets played. I mean, that gets these type of conversations and questions of which you're asking. I think it's almost impossible to ask a person who's been ingrained in the Atlanta culture and them not mentioning that. As crazy as that may sound, I've heard it mentioned so many times about how people, they want to live here, they love living here and whatever else, but they don't want to move here. They don't want to, in terms of play here. And you hear all this stuff about, it always becomes about their personal relationships with spouses for some reason. And that sounds crazy, but I've heard it so many times that it's hard to even not believe it because it seems like it's such a real thing. But I do think it has a lot to do with some of the reputation that the front office has had in the past, albeit while that has been a never-ending revolving door of general managers and head coaches and everything else. That doesn't help the situation either. And so great nightlife spot if you haven't had the wings, by the way, Gerald.
I gotta come down to Atlanta in about a couple of weeks.
Let me know. We can get together.
Yes. And I definitely am going to be down there. I think it's Spelman graduation. So I'm coming down there in a couple of weeks. And you know what? I think I said, I got to check out those Magic City wings.
Yeah, you got to check out the wings, baby. You got to check out.
I just don't know. I thought about it.
Not that I would know anything about it. Not that I would know. Not that I would know anything about them, but I mean, and it's so serious when it comes to those wings. I mean, that establishment, of course, obviously is what it is, but those wings are so serious. I mean, you've got so many to-go orders that you wouldn't even believe. I mean, they've pretty much got everything with the exception of a drive-through for those wings. I know it sounds kind of, wild and ridiculous and everything else for those who are into that sort of entertainment, but it really is something. And we'll have to get together and text on the other side.
Yes, definitely. Because it's funny because Magic City is a strip club, and it almost seems like the restaurant component, is more or less now morphed into a restaurant as opposed to the strip club. DeShaun, I got to say this live and on air, man, and everybody's going to check this out, man. I really just want to say thank you so much, good brother, because, there have been so many times, and a lot of the times, it's not done intentionally reaching out, and you've been consistent to reach out and, always doing so many different things. And I got to get better at that. And I really, really want to say, first and foremost, thank you for not only reaching out, following up and saying, hey, look, you know what? I want to make sure you come on the show. Tremendous insight as always. And I got to ask you, we got to do this again.
Yeah.
Regardless of the series being over, definitely with the draft around the corner, these playoffs are still here. Love to have you back on, especially when we get Rick back on. He's with the Pistons tonight. And then Anthony Morrow and stuff like that. We'll have him on and stuff as well. But all the best, man. Really appreciate it. And definitely look forward to talking to you down the line.
Yeah, I can't wait for the next time. I appreciate it. That's the name of the game, consistency and persistency, man. And just still trying to just continue to be great and set an example for this little 3-year-old. So I appreciate you for having me. Thanks again so much for sharing the space, and can't wait to do it again.
Always a pleasure, man. DeShaun Tate, Locked On Hawks postcast. Make sure you check him out. And what insight? What great insight on that series and seeing how it's playing out. Just unbelievable. But like I said before, I think the Knicks are back to business. If I could do my Amari Stoudemire voice, the Knicks are back. The Knicks are back. They're back. Definitely very, very excited to see how that's going to transpire with the Knicks in Game 3. And I know the Knicks fans are very, very excited. They're back to celebrating on 7th Avenue. They're back to celebrating. And when they lost, it was just so much doom and gloom. And look, I'll be honest with you, right? I've said this so many times. I used to work for the Knicks as a Knicks ball boy years ago. And, New York City is a definite great place to be when the Knicks are doing great. When the Knicks are great around this time of the year, it's, I don't want to say, but it's no other place like New York, right? The weather, the ambiance. And when you have the Knicks relevant and playing at this time of the year and even later as it gets warmer and warmer, the city is just on a different energy level. And it's the same with the Yankees. When the postseason hits for them, that's really falling in the fall. But when you have the Knicks, business is good. Business is great for bars, local establishments, restaurants, whatever, when the Knicks are playing deep in the playoffs. And make no mistake, it's good for the NBA when you have the Knicks relevant, challenging to get into the NBA Finals, let alone win the NBA Finals. But, also, too, I spoke about the whole Lakers, not the Lakers, but the Cavs and Raptors before we moved on. I got to talk about the fact is that Joel Embiid, I think it's kind of under the radar because, look, if you're a Philadelphia 76ers fan, you know the drill, the understanding and the notion that he's not going to be 100% healthy. He's not going to play back-to-backs. Get back. He's not going to do that. However, when he does play, man, he is the difference for the Philadelphia 76ers potentially moving on in that series. And for them to get him back and him, the way he played last night, it's kind of like an afterthought, right? It was almost like, wow. And, the challenge is like, if it can play out this way, you're talking about Joel Embiid being a guy that you don't have to worry about playing back-to-backs, right? Because there's going to be off days in between. But last night, 39 minutes of action, he scores 33 points, 12 of 23 from the field with 8 assists and 4 rebounds. That was a guy that you sit back and say, you know what? Boston doesn't have an answer for that. They didn't have an answer for that. They didn't have an answer for that. And yet, if you can get that, that really helps support guys like Tyrese Maxey. That helps support guys like Paul George. Helps definitely the young guys and VJ Edgecombe, as I mentioned with Tyrese Maxey. It's just such a difference maker. And the biggest challenge is, okay, they're off now, right? And knowing that they are going to turn around and they're going to be in Philly on Thursday. And if he's able to play on Thursday, man, I don't know. If you're Celtics fans, you got to look at that and say, you know what? How do you stop that? How do you stop that? Because he's not just a guy that you're definitely looking to game plan. Obviously, you're going to game plan for. But Joel Embiid, mind you, is at this stage of the NBA, he's the second best center in the league. Hands down, besides Joker, he's the second best center in the league. And when you have him out there, which was surprising that he didn't show any rust, anything, 12 of 23 from the field, finishing the game with 33 points in 39 minutes of action. That says a lot. 10 free throws, 9 of 10 from the free throw line. That says a lot. And, could all be forgotten and forgiven if Embiid is able to, again, stay healthy enough to get the Philadelphia 76ers out of the first round, and you don't have James Harden, you don't have all these other things, you got Paul George there. I think that says a lot, because keep in mind, people, you're a Sixers fan. Embiid still has 3 more years guaranteed money, just sitting there waiting for him. He's not going anywhere. He's not going anywhere. Best thing that could ever happen, perhaps, for the Philadelphia 76ers is at some point, maybe they can stretch his contract. But then if you do that, the biggest challenge is, you're going to have to deal with Paul George. And granted, Paul George, believe it or not, he has 2 more years left on his deal. And the third year, the second year of his deal, he actually has a 1-year deal after next season, after this season. 1-year deal, and that's it. But he has a player option for the second year. In all likelihood, at this stage of his career, he's going to pick that option up. So you have him for 2 more years. And even after those 2 years, you still got Embiid for 1 more, and he'll be making almost $70 million. I'm sorry, I'm not counting the man's money, but I think clearly you're going to have to understand, Sixers fans, you're going to have to just deal with this and see how it plays out will be the interesting take there. Speaking about interesting takes, and, I thought about this today. When it comes to the Lakers, and specifically the Rockets, right? I had said before, when you look at what LeBron James has done, I think LeBron James has changed a lot of people's perception, right? A lot of people's perception that the way he played and the way he has led this team, minus Luka Doncic, minus Austin Reeves, this team has an opportunity to eliminate the Houston Rockets, and really a series, for all intents and purposes, that hasn't been close, right? Let's be honest. It hasn't been close. The way that the Lakers have dominated the Houston Rockets, that has said a lot. And, I know that there's been talk about, conversations that LeBron has had with media and releasing information about, again, always the spirited debate between him and Michael Jordan. And I don't want to get into all that, but that just goes to show. And I will say this, there was a point in time where I thought that it wasn't even a thought. It was actually happening, that the Lakers, with the new management in place, deciding to move on from LeBron. Hey, we have to turn this over to Luka, because Luka is the future, but Luka is now. And LeBron James has said, hold up, wait a minute, I am still great. And make no mistake, he has shown that so consistent thus far in this first round series. And yes, I understand it's the only first round series. Yes, I understand Houston is not what we thought. Kevin Durant, who's out tonight, he's not going to play. Yes, I totally understand that. But I don't think I was in the minority of thinking that Houston still had enough to beat the Lakers. I don't think that I was in the minority. I think I was the majority. Yeah, the Lakers are going to move on, and it's no Luka, it's so much no Austin Reeves. We don't have a chance. But that's not the case. And the biggest test is, look, the Lakers win this series, OKC is going to be there waiting for them. So that would be something. But that's another discussion for another day. And I just look at the fact is that if this series plays out the way it looks like it is going to, the question becomes, if the Rockets do not force a game 7, forget games, they got to get tonight, and they got to get the next one after that. If they do not force a game 7, I don't know if you can bring this team completely back. Yes, you don't have a Fred VanVleet. I get that. Yes, Kevin Durant is hurt. I get all that. But Kevin Durant is on the other side of his career, the other side of the mountain. And now the question becomes, are you going to get stuck with the Kevin Durant of old or old Kevin Durant? And I mean that respectfully. I mean that respectfully. Is this the old Kevin Durant of the old, talented, all this stuff? He's still doing a lot of things. But again, being able to stay healthy and encountering injuries at this time, yeah, you can't foresee injuries. Injuries going to happen. But are you getting an old Kevin Durant? And if you're looking at this team, it's not supposed to be in a space where you're going out in the first round to the Lakers. And I just be very curious to see if, you have a guy and Kevin Durant will be at the forefront of being moved. And it'll be a very different offseason for him, the first time in his career, where in the past he has always dictated when he wanted to leave. Well, now he's being shown the door. And if that is the case, he will definitely have some suitors. But I'd be very curious to see how that plays out. Austin Reeves' return is pretty much, again, he is doubtful or questionable for this game. But look, I think you want to have Austin Reeves back for this series because you want Austin Reeves to get the rust off. You want to get him prepared as much as possible for the next, round, and knowing that the Oklahoma City Thunder, with their perimeter players, you're going to need him, right? And you're definitely going to need him back. And, if you're going to get Luka back in some way, shape, form, or fashion, it will be definitely something that's needed. But it remains to be seen how it's going to play out. So, I think, we're going to learn a lot. And I'll be curious to see exactly the knee-jerk reaction that will take place. Don't forget, yeah, Amo definitely was having some tech issues and stuff like that, Anthony Morrow. But again, Rick Mahorn will be back tomorrow with me, Jeff Rulin, former NBA player. Just to give you an update right now, it looks really, really apparent that right now the Orlando Magic, again, the Pistons are doing what you're supposed to be doing at home. Right? They're doing what they're supposed to be doing at home. And the unique thing about it is Orlando still has home court advantage. So the question will be, can the Pistons force a game 7? Can they get this thing back to Detroit? And so far it looks like it, but it's still early. Still a lot of basketball to be played. As I mentioned before, you still have the Toronto Raptors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're still doing battle right now. And it seems like it's nip and tuck in that game. And then later on, the Houston Rockets and the Los Angeles Lakers. Don't forget, back tomorrow, as I mentioned, Rick Mahorn be on, and we'll be talking about a recap of the Pistons as well as all the games tonight, as well as former NBA player Jeff Rulin will be joining us, as well as you whenever you watch the show. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Instagram at GBrownSports. Really appreciate the support. Thanks for hanging out with me. I don't mind being solo because I can talk and talk and talk. Like the thing, Locked on Hawks postcast host DeShaun Tate for joining me. And like I said before, I'd like to thank you. For Rick Mahorn, DeShaun Tate, I'm Gerald Brown. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. Bottom Line Sports Show's out. Peace. Enjoy the games.